We're now nearly a week into the Iran-Israel war, and things look unlikely to calm down. Of course, this war is terrible news for a whole host of reasons. First and foremost, the thousands of innocent lives that will be lost or changed forever. But this war won't only be terrible for those living in the region. It's also really quite bad news for Europe, for a variety of reasons. So in this video, we're going to look at why Europe should be more worried than most about this recent escalation, and whether there's anything the EU can actually do about it. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's get straight into it. Perhaps the most obvious reason that the escalating Israel-Iran conflict is bad news for Europe is that it will probably push up European energy prices, which have only just really started coming down from their 2022-2023 highs. Now, wars in the Middle East generally push up the global price of energy, both because, obviously, the Middle East produces a lot of natural gas and oil, which remains the energy basis of most modern economies, but also because a lot of global shipping goes through the region. However, this war could have a particularly acute effect, because it's quickly expanded to include energy infrastructure. We first saw this on Saturday when Israel hit two gas processing facilities on Iran's south coast that process gas from South Pars, the world's largest natural gas field, as well as a number of fuel depots in Tehran. Israel has also shut down the Leviathan gas field, which previously supplied Egypt and Jordan, citing security risks. This not only risks reducing global supply, after all, Iran produces something like 3.5% of the world's oil and about 7% of the world's natural gas, but it also risks increasing demand, because without Israeli gas, Egypt and Jordan will have to resort to either importing more gas from elsewhere or burning more oil to replace it where they can. Now, so far, the effect on the oil markets has been remarkably muted. While the Brent crude benchmark, which basically reflects the average international price for a barrel of oil, rose from about $65 early last week to $72 on Monday, this is still pretty low by recent standards, and actually down from the peak of $76 we saw on Friday. This is in large part because OPEC, the international cartel of oil-producing states, has been increasing production recently, but also because traders are apparently confident that the conflict will remain contained. Nonetheless, this is already bad news for Europe, because if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that higher energy prices are terrible for the European economy. Because, as a net energy importer, high oil prices push up inflation across the continent and undermine European industry. The European economy was only just getting back on its feet after the energy price shock we saw a couple of years ago, triggered in large part by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So another energy shock threatens to push the continent back into recession. On that note, high oil prices are also great news for Putin and the Kremlin, given that hydrocarbon revenues essentially fund Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Putin will be relieved that international attention, and perhaps more importantly, Trump's attention, has now turned away from Ukraine and towards the Middle East. Furthermore, things could get a lot worse if the Ayatollahs resort to their old playbook of attacking Saudi oil fields, as they did via the Houthis in 2019, or if they decide to close the Strait of Hormuz, which something like 20% of the world's oil supply passes through. So far, this hasn't happened, presumably because the Ayatollahs know that Trump won't respond well to higher oil prices. But it's still very much on the cards, especially if the Ayatollahs conclude that the US's involvement is inevitable, or the Ayatollahs get desperate. And JP Morgan estimates that oil prices could reach $130 a barrel if the conflict expands. It's hard to overstate how bad this would be for the European economy. Oil peaked at $116 a barrel in mid-2022, so $130 would mean an even more severe inflationary shock, and probably a recession, given that many European countries used up their limited fiscal space surviving the last energy crisis, and won't be able to borrow their way out of the next one. High inflation will also invite higher interest rates, which will put even more strain on European public finances, which are already in a bit of a state. Another reason this war could be difficult for Europe is that it threatens to trigger another wave of immigration, as the Syrian civil war did in 2015. Netanyahu has already started talking about regime change, and while Netanyahu has suggested the Ayatollahs could be replaced by a more pro-Western government, far more likely outcomes include a new military dictatorship or civil war, as happened in Syria. Either outcome would probably trigger a wave of immigration out of Iran and any other nearby states, most likely towards Europe. This will present European leaders with a difficult dilemma. Do they take in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of vulnerable Iranians, or do they close their doors and somehow try and convince Iran's neighbours, like say Turkey, to house them instead? This is sort of what the EU did in 2016 when they agreed to pay Turkey billions of euros to house some 3 million Syrian immigrants instead of letting them into Europe. Leaving aside the moral question of whether it was right to expect Turkey to provide for millions of Syrians when the EU's GDP is roughly 16 times that of Turkey's, this deal left the EU uncomfortably dependent on Erdogan, who was able to leverage this dependence to extract various concessions over the years. And this speaks to a more general transatlantic asymmetry when it comes to the Middle East. Europe has far less influence over the region than America does, but is far more exposed to the consequences of regional instability, which is why the Middle East has always been a difficult topic in transatlantic relations. Anyway, the final reason this is difficult for Europe is that it puts European leaders in a difficult position politically. As we've detailed in previous videos, over the past couple of weeks, European leaders have been turning on Netanyahu over his ever-escalating assault on Gaza. However, now that Israel is now at war with Iran, European leaders have had to make some screeching U-turns, reaffirming their support for Israel and criticizing Iran for its nuclear ambitions. Of course, these leaders would say that there's nothing inconsistent about this. They don't support what's happening in Gaza, but they do support Israel's right to defend itself against Iran, as they see it. Nonetheless, this is a difficult balancing act that will both frustrate their electorates and probably be used by Netanyahu as diplomatic cover to continue his assault on Gaza. Like a lot of things right now, this topic is incredibly complex and ever-changing. And here at TLDR, we're committed to learning more to help us understand the world around us. Luckily for us though, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, helps us do just that. We know that learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for your professional and personal growth. And Brilliant helps you get smarter in minutes a day. You can even perfect your skills wherever you are, whether you're on the go or winding down. It's the opposite of mindless scrolling. Brilliant has the perfect mix of engaging problems, competitive features, and daily encouragements to keep you motivated and on track. For instance, Brilliant's data science course uses real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. No matter your level of skill, these courses are perfect to start or continue learning data analysis, with a full suite of content covering data visualizations, algorithms, regression models, and more. You can even learn to parse and visualize massive datasets from brands you know to make them easier to interpret. Plus, all of the content on Brilliant is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from Stanford, MIT, Caltech, Microsoft, Google, and more. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. By doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Plus, they'll know that you came from us, which really helps us out.